Dawn breaks cold over Bosnia, and 6 jets skate the valleys like they've done before, low, fast, and convinced the terrain is their shield. It's a bet that worked on local radars. It doesn't work against an eye in the sky. High above, in E3 AWACS circles at altitude, it's radar looking past hills and tree leans. The screen lights up with returns that don't squawk friendly codes and don't belong in the no-fly zone. A controller keys the mic and sends a call that pilots don't forget. Black Flight, you have 6 bogeys, BRAA 320 for 52 at 7,000. Flanking, translation that matters in a cockpit. Bearing 320 degrees from your nose, 52 miles out, altitude 7,000 feet, crossing your path, not coming straight at you, not running away. It's a geometry problem and a time problem. The F-16s roll to cut them off. This wasn't the first time NATO tracked intruders under Operation Deny Flight. For months, fighters had shadowed violators, issued warnings, and watched them leave. The pattern bred a dangerous belief. Maybe the rules only exist on paper. That morning felt different from the opening call. Not a routine monitor. An unambiguous intercept. Why the shift? A few reasons. First, the mandate had teeth. UN Resolution 816 didn't just authorize a no-fly zone. It authorized enforcement. Second, AWACS had a strong track. Multiple aircraft coordinated, climbing in the direction of a known industrial target. Third, the clock. If the violators dropped ordnance inside the zone, the legal and operational threshold would be crossed, and the engagement would move from warnings to action in seconds. Everyone on the radio loop could feel it. On the AWACS, the air battle manager sits at a scope that looks like an organized storm of symbols. Friendlies were codes. Neutrals get tracked and sorted. Unknowns, bogeys, are the red flags. The F-16s hear the picture update in clean chunks. Bearing, range, altitude, aspect. They also hear one word pilots treat like a tripwire. Declare. It's the process that turns an unknown into a hostile based on behavior in a restricted zone. You don't shoot bogeys. You can engage hostiles. The legal dance runs alongside the tactical one. Warnings go out on guard frequencies in English and local language, instructing the violators to turn, land, or exit the zone. The calls aren't performative. They're recorded and time-stamped. They're also easy to ignore if you think the pattern will hold and the enforcers won't pull the trigger. That assumption is the quiet antagonist of the morning. It pushes the Jastreb pilots forward. It pushes NATO pilots over the edge. Inside the F-16, the picture is both simple and busy. Altitude selected. Radar sweeping. External tanks feeding. Weapons page set to missiles but safe. The pilot rides the intercept math the way a surfer rides a wave. Angle across to a cutoff, not a tail chase because cutoffs steal distance fast. The AWACS call says flanking, which is perfect for a slice in. The Americans want to arrive with options, not after the fact. They also know every mile flown at low altitude eats fuel twice as fast. The plan must finish before bingo, the mandatory turn-home number written in ink. On the other side, the Bosnian Serb pilots climb to 2,000 meters to set up an attack run. It's a necessary move for aircraft using optical sights and old-school bombing techniques. But popping up does something brutal to their survivability. It puts them above the radar clutter, past the ridge lines, and smack into the clearest slice of the AWACS cone. The moment they rise, they light up for everyone watching. Terms matter in the next 5 minutes. Bogey means unknown. Bandit means confirmed enemy aircraft in wartime. Hostile means a declared target that meets the rules for engagement. The labels aren't academic. They're the difference between tailing and firing. The AWACS controller isn't a faceless voice. He's the conductor, deconflicting airspace, pushing sanitized corridors, and clearing shooters when the rules say they can shoot. He also has one more job. Keep reminding everyone that this is an enforcement mission, not a duel. Commit is another word that hits hard in headsets. It marks the decision point when a fighter pair leaves their patrol track and charges the threat with intent to intercept. The F-16s commit. The controllers compress the picture. The bogies are now 6, split into pairs, and trending toward the factory. It's not theory anymore. It's a clock with a fuse. Why this morning? Why here? Geography plays a quiet role. The hills around Banja Luka offer low-level cover, but also funnel tracks toward predictable pop-up points. That makes AWACS surveillance more efficient. It also dictates the intercept geometry. The Americans don't have to chase. They can cut at an angle and be waiting when the Jastrebs climb to their bomb run altitude. For the defenders, the only invisible place is down in the folds of terrain. The instant they climb to aim, they're seen. There's a human element underneath all the acronyms. The F-16 pilots have done this dance for weeks without pulling the trigger. The Jastreb crews have flown previous sorties and returned. Both sides carry their own version of this is how it usually goes. That's exactly why the morning hits with a different temperature. The radio language tightens. The pauses shorten. Even with the headsets on, you can feel the cockpit go quiet in a way that isn't silence at all. It's focus. AWACS starts stacking instructions. Warnings broadcast. A land or exit call repeated. No compliance. The next step is both legal and moral cover. Hostile declaration based on violating a UN-mandated no-fly zone, ignoring warnings, and continuing an attack profile. The checklist turns into a green light. The F-16s are cleared to intercept with force if needed. This is the moment when policy becomes action. There's also a practical reason the Americans want to arrive first rather than react late. Forward quarter shots with radar-guided missiles have reach, and reach equals control. A beyond visual range shot forces the other side to defend, which buys time for follow UPS or for the second fighter to slide to a position that can't be outturned. If the Jastrebs get their bombs off and break low immediately, they're harder to see, harder to sort, and harder to hit. The intercept is a race not just to a place, but to a phase of the fight. Fuel lingers like a shadow over every decision. Low altitude burns more. Maneuver burns more. Chasing into the mountains compounds the problem. The first pair's goal is to make contact, stop the attack, and create space for the next pair rushing in. Nobody wants to be deep in hostile terrain with the reserve needle making threats. That's why you'll hear pilots call approaching bingo, even while lining up a shot. It's not hesitation. It's discipline. One more layer is easy to miss: language and clarity. Some accounts say warnings went out in English and Serbo-Croatian on guard frequencies. Others argue the timing and phrasing were less than perfect. That debate still lives in after-action notes and interviews. What's not debated is the sequence everybody recognized in real time. Unknowns detected, warnings issued, violators continued, and the intercept turned from escort to enforcement. As the formation of Jastrebs approaches the factory, the AWACS pictures shift from lines to consequences. The Americans are close enough to see contrails and heat shimmer. The violators are close enough to arm switches and feel metal click. The air between them is about to decide something bigger than 6 airplanes. It's about to decide whether a no-fly zone is a suggestion or a rule with consequences. The final moment before everything breaks is quiet in the way only combat can be: a HUD framing rectangles, a thumb resting on a switch, a radio call clipped clean, an altimeter marching. On one side, a belief that warnings are theater. On the other, a mandate that says this stops now. The first bombs fall. The line is crossed. And the next sound in the headset is the one that changes the day: weapons free. What follows is speed, smoke, and split-second choices. The AMRAAM leaves the rail, and the sky turns predatory in an instant. They didn't launch to make a point. They launched to hit a factory that kept the war running. The target churned out parts, ammo, and credibility. Taking it offline, even for days, meant fewer shells landing where they shouldn't. That urgency is why volunteers strapped into jets that belonged to an earlier era and pushed into a sky they knew was patrolled. Their aircraft, the Soko J21 Jastreb, was built to be rugged, cheap, and simple. Think light attack workhorse, not air superiority thoroughbred. No onboard radar. No beyond visual range missiles. Subsonic top end. Bombing was done the old way. Pop up, put the target in the optical sight, hold a steady line, and pickle the bombs at the right moment. It's honest flying, but it demands altitude and exposure at the exact second the enemy is looking for you. On paper, that's survivable against short-range guns and local SAMs. Against a modern fighter carrying radar missiles, it's a dare. Across the chessboard sat the F-16C. Not just a fast jet, but a node in a network. The radar sees down into clutter. The cockpit can sort multiple tracks. The pilot hears clean BRAA calls from AWACS that shrink the world to bearing, range, altitude, and aspect. And hanging on the rails are two styles of punch. AMRAAMs that can be launched before the enemy ever knows who fired, and Sidewinders that chase heat like a dog locked onto a scent. But the mismatch wasn't only about machines. It was about information. The F-16s weren't hunting blind. They were guided by a radar orbiting miles above the fight. The AWACS isn't bothered by hills. It stares into the no-fly zone, paints a picture, and updates it every few seconds. That picture goes to fighters who can time their intercepts to meet violators at the worst possible moment, right when they need to climb to aim their bombs. The Jastreb pilots had none of that. At best, a basic threat receiver might blink when a radar looked their way. Often, even that warning came too late to matter. So why fly? Because the target mattered, because previous violators have been shadowed and let go, and because war rewards risk until it doesn't. In the months before this morning, NATO's pattern often looked like watch and warn. That pattern built a dangerous habit in the minds of crews on the ground. Run low, pop up fast, drop quickly, and be gone before anyone really commits. It felt doable, especially for pilots who had pulled it off before. The geometry of the strike forced their hand. A Jastreb dropping 250 kg is almost equal to 550 lb. Bombs needs a clean line. At very low level, the sight picture is terrible. The ground rushes past too fast to hold the pipper on target. So they pop to around 2,000 meters to stabilize, get the factory drifting into the crosshairs, and pickle. That pop-up is the crack in the armor. The moment they rise above the ridge line, terrain masking vanishes, and the AWACS cone sees them like beads on a string. The F-16s don't have to guess. They just have to arrive. Training and doctrine widen the gap. F-16 crews live in the world of timelines, minimum abort ranges, no escape zones, and fuel gates. They practice sorting multiple targets, committing, and shooting, all while managing the clock on their fuel and their distance to a safe recovery base. Jastreb pilots were brave and competent, but they were set up for a different job. Light strikes, close support, hit-and-run work where the worst threats were usually on the ground, not coming at Mach from the horizon. This wasn't arrogance. It was math. One side had speed, sensors, and missiles that outran decisions. The other had courage, terrain, and a plan that depended on NATO hesitating. Courage matters. Terrain helps. But when the first bombs fell inside a UN-mandated no-fly zone, the hesitancy ended and the math took over. They crossed the line by doing exactly what their mission required. And once they did, the intercept stopped being theoretical. The next minutes would be all speed, judgment, and luck, mostly luck for those without radar. What came after the drop was the part nobody forgets. But the drop was only the fuse. The detonation was the scramble that followed. The first AMRAAM hit doesn't just take out a jet. It takes out structure. Formation turns into fragments. A clean six ship becomes lone streaks, trying to make themselves small. Each pilot drops the nose and runs for the valleys because down low the air feels thicker, the ground feels safer, and the radar picture gets messier. It's the right instinct. It's just not enough. Terrain masking is a real thing. Hills hide you from radars at the same altitude. Ground clutter makes look-down searches harder. But the F-16S radar can sort targets, diving through the clutter, and AWACS looking from above still sees shapes weaving between ridges. The hunters aren't guessing who went where. They're updating vectors while they descend. Down low, everything is violent and immediate. A Jastreb at treetop level is skimming wire farms and riverbeds, pulling 4 to 5G in turns that feel like they'll fold the wings. The pilot's world collapses to a backward glance at the canopy, a forward glance at the next ridge, and the gnawing thought that whoever is behind you doesn't have to see you for long, just long enough. You're hoping the American overshoots. He's trying not to. That's why he holds lag pursuit instead of sliding into a flashy lead turn. Lag keeps him inside your turn radius without blasting past your nose, and it buys him time to choose a missile rather than a knife fight. Then a new heat blooms on the tail. The Sidewinder is awake. People talk about heat seekers like they're simple, but a modern AMRAAM is clever. It sees in infrared, tracks bright hot spots, and uses proportional navigation to curve into a collision path. It's not just chasing, it's predicting where you will be. If you're in a Jastreb with little or no flares and a hot exhaust, you're practically wearing a neon sign. If the missile detonates close and off-axis, the blast can peel pieces without structural kill, take a bite out of a fin, chew holes in a stabilizer, bend something that was designed to be straight. You feel it immediately. The jet starts to wander in ya. Controls go noisy. You're still flying, but you're now wrestling a machine that wants to depart. A radio call snaps, "I'm hit," and then nothing. Silence can mean 3 things in a cockpit. You're masked by terrain, your set has failed, or the jet's electrical heart took a punch. VHF and UHF both behave like flashlights. The mountains throw shadows where the signal never reaches. A dive that saves you from radar can also swallow your voice. You keep talking anyway because sometimes the echo slips through a gap and someone hears enough to help. The F-16 driver has his own problems. Low altitude is a fuel furnace. Afterburner turns minutes into seconds. He's balancing 3 clocks. The geometry to make a shot, the fuel to get home, and the rules that keep him from charging blind into a valley full of unknown threats. Missiles solve part of that. A Fox 2 from behind at close range is fast and clean. No need to point the jet's nose directly at the target for long. You fire inside the no-escape zone and then manage the next turn, already thinking about the next bandit. For the Jastreb, the valleys are a maze with moving walls. You aim for riverbeds because they carve the lowest lines. You shadow roads because they sit on flat cuts through terrain. You bank harder than you want because hard is the only way to keep the F-16 from seeing you in a straight line. One pilot clips through the bottom of a power line span, and the Sidewinder eats the flash instead of the fuselage. That buys seconds, not safety. Seconds. Energy becomes the currency that decides everything. The Americans arrive with more of it. More speed, more altitude, more options. Every defensive break the Jastreb makes spends energy he can't afford to lose. Every time the F-16 chooses lag over lead, he banks energy. It's the invisible trade nobody watching from the ground can see. By the 3rd turn, one pilot is flying a wounded, slower jet that won't climb. The other isn't a machine that wins simply by refusing to give away what it has. The next AMRAAM comes from a slant angle that feels unfair. It is. Beyond visual range shots exploit the fact that a radar-guided missile doesn't care about your eyesight or your timeline. It cares about range, closure, and aspect. Fired inside its no-escape zone, it forces a defense that a subsonic jet can't complete. You can dive, you can beam, you can jink, but if you don't have a radar warning receiver that talks clearly and countermeasures that work, you are mostly hoping, not solving. Ejections look simple from the outside. They're not. You need altitude and attitude. You need the jet to be pointing somewhere that won't eat you the second you leave the seat. At treetop level, even a perfect pull can put you into the canopy before the chute blossoms. That's why one pilot makes it good altitude, good timing, and another doesn't. The difference can be a handful of meters and half a heartbeat. On the American side, discipline looks like restraint. It's easy to get greedy in a chase. It's harder to call approaching bingo, pull up off a target you nearly have, and trust the second pair racing in from the southwest to finish the work. That's what professionalism looks like in a headset. It sounds like a short call and a clean turn. Down in the folds of Bosnia, one more pair of Jastrebs still runs. They know the others have fallen or gone silent. They also know that outrunning a jet that starts a kilometer closer every minute is fantasy. That's when desperate ideas look attractive. Use terrain. Use surprise. Use the cliff and make the pursuer choose between caution and collision. It's the kind of gamble only pilots under pressure even consider. But that decision belongs to the next chapter. First, there's the cold math of fuel ticking down in the F-16S, the arrival of fresh fighters, and the last flicker of hope that terrain might do what missiles could not. The target slides into the crosshairs. Bomb racks click. The Jastrebs release, sending heavy iron arcing down on the factory they've come to silence. The hits confirm it. This isn't a flyby. It's a strike inside a no-fly zone. For NATO, that's the trigger. The intercept turns into an engagement. Weapons free, echoes over the radio, and everything changes in a breath. An F-16 pilot selects an AIM-120 AMRAAM, a weapon that can hunt by radar and kill before the enemy even sees the shooter. A box frames the target on the HUD. The tone steadies. The pilot commits. The missile leaves the rail, searching for a radar signature that is nowhere to hide in open sky. A flash blooms in the distance. The formation jolts. A wingman is gone. Suddenly, the sky isn't a route to the target. It's a trap. The Jastrebs brake hard and dive for the valleys, trading open air for terrain and speed. But now the fight has started, and it's not just about who fires first. It's about who can stay alive long enough to get home. And the first missile was only the beginning. The first detonation doesn't just erase an airplane. It erases order. 6 becomes 5, and 5 instantly becomes a blur of lone shapes sprinting for the valleys, each pilot convinced that if he can get low enough, close enough to the ground, the sky will stop seeing him. Low-level flying feels like safety because the horizon goes away. The ridges hug you. The altimeter settles. But that comfort is a trick. An eye in the sky still paints the picture, and the hunter doesn't have to see you all the time, just long enough. This is where instinct and physics clash. The Jastreb drivers drop into the folds, using terrain masking to hide from radar. Terrain does help. A ridge line can block a look-down radar. Ground clutter can smear a return. But masking is a shield with holes. AWACS looks from above, where ridges don't hide anything, and the F-16's own radar, cued by those updates, can catch a glint of metal as it crosses a gap. The Americans aren't guessing. They're narrowing. Every call shrinks the box. Down low, every decision becomes immediate and physical. Turn too shallow, and the pursuer sees you longer. Turn too hard, and you bleed so much energy you can't climb when you need to. The Jastreb responds like a loyal workhorse, steady, rugged, but not fast. The F-16 responds like a blade. This is where lag pursuit beats heroics. Instead of diving into a flashy lead turn, the F-16 hangs back a hair, sitting just outside the defender's turn circle, keeping closure under control so it won't overshoot. It feels patient and predatory at the same time. It buys angles without burning gas for nothing. It also buys a clean weapon solution. A heat bloom flickers in the American scope, and the Sidewinder wakes up. People imagine heat seekers as simple bloodhounds. The reality is nastier. The AM, 9MS Seeker sees an infrared with filters that ignore some flares and look for the hot core of an exhaust. It uses proportional navigation. The missile steers to null the rate of change of the line of sight. So it doesn't chase where you are, it cuts to where you'll be. Fired from behind, inside the no-escape zone, it is, and this is a technical term, a proximity fuse does its job near a set of power lines. The blast and shrapnel snap toward the brightest heat and the nearest metal. A fin goes ragged. The vertical stabilizer loses a bite. The hit isn't a kill, but it's a theft. The jet now yaws when it should track, drifts when it should hold line. The pilot feels it first through his hands and feet. More pressure for less response. The brain catches up a second later, still flying, but now on borrowed time. He calls it in on the radio and hears silence. That silence isn't drama. It's physics and damage. UHF and VHF need line of sight. A valley is a radio shadow. If the electrical bus took a punch, the set is cold. If the antenna snapped, the signal is a whisper. Even when the set works, stress can narrow a pilot's hearing and memory. Auditory exclusion is real. The brain filters to survive. You keep talking anyway, because sometimes the path of your words snakes over a ridge at the perfect second and someone hears what they need. Up front, the F-16 pilot rides to clocks, geometry, and gas. Low-level flight is a fuel furnace. Every pull of G, every swipe of afterburner turns minutes into thin air. He's thinking about bingo, fuel, even while he's thinking about a shot. That's not conflict. That's good arithmetic. He doesn't want a knife fight at treetop level. Missiles exist, so he doesn't have to. A Fox 2 from close behind is clean and quick. Seeker locked, tone steady, off the rail, back to managing the next turn. The job is to solve the problem and move on before fuel writes its own orders. For the Jastreb, the map becomes a ground-level maze. Riverbeds are safest because water carves the lowest channels. Roads often sit on flat cuts with fewer surprise wires. You get so low that farmhouses feel like checkpoints. The rule is simple. Don't be predictable. You brake left just a hair early. You brake right late. You toss in a climb where the pursuer expects a dive. It's not a plan. It's a rhythm, and you hope yours is offbeat enough to make a missile's math just a little wrong. But energy is the invisible currency deciding the fight. The F-16 arrived with a stack of it. Altitude, speed, options. Every defensive break the Jastreb makes spends energy he can't buy back. The Falcon, flying lag and letting the fight move, keeps his speed. In aviation, speed is life because speed gives you choice. By the third turn, one airplane still has it, the other doesn't. That's when beyond visual range weapons start feeling unfair. They are not. They're the point. Another AMRAAM arcs in from a slant angle. The Jastreb pilot never sees the shooter. He feels the warning light blink, or he doesn't, depending on whether his threat receiver is alive. And then there's fire where air was a second ago. AMRAAMs have phases: boost, mid-course guidance from the launching jet, and then pitbull, when the missile turns on its own radar and hunts by itself. If the shooter gets you to pitbull at the right range and aspect, your options collapse. You can notch, turn perpendicular to the radar and dive for ground clutter, but with a subsonic jet and no altitude, the notch becomes a wish. You're defending with tricks against a weapon that's solving with math. The hunters manage their own tunnel vision. Target fixation kills. The American has to resist driving straight into a canyon for a shot he doesn't absolutely need. He scans the EADI to keep the nose above rocks, checks the fuel state like a metronome, and listens to the picture callouts, so he doesn't cut into his wingman's line. The cockpit is loud with tasks, but the language stays short. Bearing, range, altitude, press off your shot. Good comms save gas and lives. One Jastreb buys a heartbeat with pure nerve. He schemes under a set of transmission lines so low that the air sparkles with dust. The Sidewinder leaps at the flash of the wires instead of the exhaust plume and detonates early. The blast clips the tail, but not enough to fold it. That kind of near miss isn't luck alone. It's a pilot using the environment as a weapon. It's also a reminder that even perfect weapons are slaves to physics and timing. The reprieve lasts seconds. Seconds matter. Ejection decisions cut through the noise. A seat might be rated 0-0 in brochures, 0 altitude, 0 airspeed, but real life demands room. At 400 knots of 50 meters, you can beat the ground or you can beat the fire. Rarely both. One pilot hauls the handle as the jet starts to torch, gets good attitude, and the chute blooms. Another waits a beat too long, or tries to climb in a machine that's out of lift, and the envelope closes. From the ground, those outcomes look random. In the cockpit, they're the sum of airspeed, pitch, and timing measured in quarters of a second. The American pair keeps it professional. They don't both stack onto the same target. One presses, one covers. They switch when the angles get ugly. Covering isn't passive. It's watching for a pop-up threat, keeping tally on the other bandits, and ensuring your wingman has an exit that isn't through your jet. Discipline like that doesn't slow a fight. It cleans it up. It's why one missile can go, then another, without anyone asking, "Where are you?" at the worst time. Meanwhile, the valley's compress time. At altitude, you measure distance in miles. Down here, it's measured in seconds between ridgelines. The Jastreb pilots feel the space running out. Their best play, stay low, be unpredictable, hasn't shaken the hunters. Hope shifts shape. It turns into make them overshoot, make them run out of gas, make one mistake they don't expect. That last hope is the most dangerous because it invites gambles that police training tells you not to take. One more Sidewinder takes its shot from a cool, disciplined position. The F-16 doesn't knife in front to show the flag. He stays off to the side, nose pointed slightly behind the Jastreb's tail, so closure stays stable and the seeker sees a clean, steady heat source. The missile does what missiles do when everything is lined up. It shortens future into present. The tail shears. The nose pitches. The pilot reaches for the handle and discovers that altitude has opinions. Even as kills rack up, the Americans have a second enemy that doesn't blink: fuel. Every second at low level is expensive. After each shot, a quick scan hits the fuel gauge and the mental map of diverts. Approaching bingo isn't a suggestion or a sad note. It's a boundary. Cross it and you might want to fight you don't survive returning from. That call is coming. And when it does, someone will have to break away with targets still moving, trusting the next pair racing in to finish what they started. The hunt feels endless to anyone watching it unfold in real time. In truth, it's minutes. The difference between minutes and forever is how hard the heart pounds. For the Jastrebs, every turn is the last they can afford. For the F-16S, every turn trims the margin to get home. The sky is loud with warnings, tones, and short words that do heavy lifting. And the ground is getting closer, not farther. One pair of Jastrebs is still ahead, sprinting deeper into the folds, reaching for an idea that might break the script. If terrain couldn't hide them, maybe terrain could trap the hunter. It's a thought born out of pressure and skill. Force a pull-up so late that even a perfect pilot in a perfect jet has to choose between caution and collision. It's not a tactic you teach. It's a tactic you reach for when everything else has failed. But before that gamble, the chase has to meet an even simpler truth. Jets don't fight on courage alone. They fight on time. And the next voice you hear in the headset isn't a victory call. It's the clock speaking. Approaching bingo. The hunt isn't over. It's about to change. Combat isn't just about aim. It's about math. The first pair of F-16S has been burning fuel low and fast, chasing subsonic jets through hills that punish every maneuver. The clock ticks toward bingo, the minimum fuel to get home. But they still push for one more shot, one more intercept that might stop another rocket, another run, another loss on the ground. An AMRAAM tracks cleanly on a Jastreb that never sees the shooter. Another missile follows and finds a second target. The results are brutal and brief. One pilot pulls the handle and punches out, vanishing under a chute that blossoms like a second sunrise. Another tries to hold the climb and loses the aircraft to fire and force. The F-16 roars overhead, climbing and turning away, eyes flicking to fuel numbers that won't argue. Bingo isn't a suggestion. It's a line. The first pair turns out. They've done damage, but the fight isn't over. Fresh jets are already racing in, and the last Jastrebs are running hard. What happens next will decide whether anyone else makes it across the border. When you're outmatched, you start betting with seconds. Two surviving Jastrebs drag the throttle forward and sprint for the valleys, hugging ground so low the trees turn to a green blur. The F-16S shadow them, staying just high enough to keep options open. Then comes a move born from instinct and desperation. A straight line toward a cliff face at max speed. If they can force the pull-up at the last possible heartbeat, maybe the pursuer will flinch, overshoot, or lose the shot. The ground rushes up. G-forces build. One pilot edges the nose just enough. The other is a breath too late. Metal meets earth, and the sky takes one less voice. The F-16S blasts through the smoke column and lock again. A Fox 2, sending a seeker after the last hot trail. The missile closes the gap and snaps the tail out from under the fleeing jet. The pilot tries to eject, but altitude is a thief. There's no time. It's the kind of ending that never feels like victory, even when tactics worked exactly as designed. And out in the distance, another radar blip limps alone toward home. There's one damaged Jastreb, still airborne, frame bent but flying. The pilot watches his instruments as if staring hard enough can keep the numbers from sliding the wrong way. An F-16 appears and slides into position. This should be the end. One squeeze and it's over. Instead, something unexpected happens. At least, that's how the story is told by those who were there. The F-16 forms up alongside, canopy to canopy, matching speed. The American glances over. The Jastreb pilot looks back. A hand comes up in a crisp salute. Then the F-16 arcs away and leaves him to fly on. Not everyone buys the anecdote. In the fog of war, memories can blur and moments can be retold with a little light added. But what's not in dispute is this. After a day that proved NATO would enforce the sky, one battered aircraft made it home. And with it came a story that pilots still talk about. Mercy, message, or myth. Either way, the scoreboard for the day was set, and the wider world was paying attention. By the end of the engagement, four Bosnian Serb aircraft were credited as destroyed. Captain Robert Wilbur Wright was credited with 3 victories, and Captain Stephen Yogi Allen with 1, the highest USAF single mission tally since the Korean War. For NATO, it was a first. The alliance had fired in anger to enforce a UN no-fly zone. The deterrent wasn't theoretical anymore. Some details remain argued over. How many aircraft were in the strike package? Whether only J21 Jastrebs were present or if other types joined. How warnings were delivered and understood under pressure. What was said over the radio and when, and whether that canopy-to-canopy salute happened exactly as told. The broad contours, though, are consistent in official tallies and pilot accounts. A dawn strike, missiles called Fox 3 and Fox 2, a formation shattered in minutes, and a line drawn across the Bosnian sky. The impact went beyond a single morning. After this engagement, the message was unmistakable. The no-fly zone wasn't a suggestion. It set conditions for later operations and shaped how air power would be used over the Balkans. Harder rules, tighter timelines, and fewer assumptions that warnings alone would keep the air quiet. It also left a human imprint that statistics can't touch. Volunteers strapped into older jets and flew into a fight most people would have avoided. On the other side, aviators executed their orders inside rules written to limit chaos on the ground. 3 pilots didn't make it home. One limped away under a cloud of smoke and a story. And above the hills near Banja Luka, NATO's first combat shots wrote a message the entire region could read. Technology decided the outcome. Nerves decided the timing. But it was will, the choice to press, to fire, to turn away, that decided what history would remember. The morning NATO went hot wasn't about who could fly faster. It was about what happens when rules become reality, and how one day in 1994 changed the way the sky over Bosnia was policed forever.